Okay, so chapter 8, Inconveniences of Entertaining a Poor Man Who May Be Rich. Cosette could not help casting one look toward the large doll still displayed in the toy booth. Then she knocked. The door opened. The Thénardier appeared with a candle in her hand. "Oh, it's you, you little beggar! My lord, but you've taken your time. She's been playing, the wretch." "Madame," said Cosette, trembling, "there's a gentleman who is coming for lodging." The Thénardier very quickly replaced her surly look with their amiable sneer, an instant change typical of innkeepers, and looked for the newcomer with eager eyes. "Is it you, monsieur?" she said. "Yes, madame," answered the man, touching his hat. Rich travelers are not so polite. The gesture and the sight of the stranger's clothes and baggage, which the Thénardiers took in at a glance, made the amiable sneer disappear and the surly look return. She added dryly, "Come in, fellow." The fellow entered. The Thénardiers cast a second glance at him, particularly his long coat, which was absolutely threadbare, and his hat, which was somewhat dented, and with a nod, wink, and wrinkle of the nose, consulted her husband, who was still drinking with the wagon-drivers. The husband answered by that imperceptible shake of the forefinger, which, supported by a protrusion of the lips, signifies in such a case complete destitution. Thereupon the Thénardiers exclaimed, "Ah, my good man, I'm very sorry, but I don't have a room." "Put me wherever," said the man, "in the attic, in the stable. I'll pay as though I had a room." 40 sous. 40 sous, very well. In advance. 40 sous, whispered a wagon driver to the Thénardiers, "but it's only 20 sous." "It's 40 sous for him," replied the Thénardiers in the same tone. "I don't lodge poor people for less." "That's true," added her husband quietly. "It ruins a house's reputation to have that sort." Meanwhile, the man, after leaving his stick and bundle on a bench, sat down at a table on which Cosette had been quick to place a bottle of wine and a glass. The peddler who had asked for the bucket of water had gone to carry it himself to his horse. Cosette had resumed her place under the kitchen table and her knitting. The man, who hardly touched his lips to the wine he had poured, was contemplating the child with a strange intensity. Cosette was ugly. If happy, she might have been pretty. We had already sketched this pitiful little face. Cosette was thin and pale. She was about 8 years old, but one would hardly have thought her 6. Her large eyes, sunk in a sort of shadow, were dimmed by continually weeping. The corners of her mouth had that curve of habitual anguish seen in the condemned and the terminally ill. Her hands were, as her mother had guessed, covered with chilblains. The light of the fire shining upon her made her bones stand out, and her emaciation hideously visible. Because she was always shivering, she had acquired the habit of drawing her knees together. Her clothing was only rags that would have provoked pity in the summer, and that elicited horror in this winter. She had on nothing but cotton, and that full of holes, not a speck of wool. Her skin showed here and there, and on it bruises where the Thénardiers had grabbed her. Her naked legs were red and rough. The hollows below her collarbone were enough to make you weep. Everything about this child, her walk, her attitude, the sound of her voice, the pauses between one word and another, her look, her silences, her slight gesture, expressed and portrayed a single idea: fear. Fear was spread all over her. She was, so to speak, covered with it. Fear squeezed her elbows against her side, drew her heels up under her skirt, made her shrink into the least possible space, prevented her from breathing more than was absolutely necessary, and had become what might be called her bodily habit, without possible variation, except to increase. In the depths of her eyes there was an expression of astonishment mingled with terror. This fear was such that on coming in, wet as she was, Cosette had not dared dry herself by the fire, but had gone back silently to her work. The expression on the face of this child of 8 was habitually so sad, and occasionally so tragic, that it seemed at certain moments as if she were on the way to become an idiot or a demon. Never, as we have said, had she shown what it is to pray. Never had she set foot inside a church. "How can I spare the time?" the Thénardier said. The man in the yellow coat did not take his eyes off Cosette. Suddenly the Thénardier exclaimed, "Ah, I forgot! That bread!" Cosette, as was her habit whenever the Thénardier raised her voice, came out quickly from under the table. She had entirely forgotten the bread. She took recourse to the expedient of constantly terrified children. She lied. "Madame, the baker was shut." "You ought to have knocked." "I did knock, madame." "Well?" "He didn't open." "I'll find out tomorrow if that's true," said the Thénardier, "and if you're lying you'll do a little dance. Meanwhile, give me back the 15 sous. Cosette poked her hand into her apron pocket and turned pale. It was not there. "Come on," said the Thénardier. "Didn't you hear me?" Cosette turned the pocket inside out. There was nothing there. What did she do with the money? The desperate little girl could not have uttered a word. She was petrified. "Have you lost my 15-sou piece?" screamed the Thénardier. "Or are you trying to steal from me?" At the same time she reached toward the cowhide strap hanging in the chimney corner. This menacing gesture gave Cosette the strength to cry out, "Forgive me, madame, madame, I won't do it any more." The Thénardiers took down the whip. Meanwhile, unnoticed, the man in the yellow coat had been fumbling in his waistcoat pocket. The other travelers were drinking or playing cards and paid no attention to anything else. Cosette was anxiously huddling in the chimney corner, trying to squeeze together and hide her poor half-naked limbs. The Thénardier raised her arm. "I beg your pardon, madame," said the man, "but I just saw something fall out of the pocket of that little girl's apron and roll away. That may be it." At the same time he stooped and appeared to look around the floor for a moment. "Just as I thought. Here it is," he said, rising, and he handed a silver piece to the Thénardier. "Yes, that's it," she said. That was not it. It was a 20-sou piece, but the Thénardier did not mind the profit. She put the coin in her pocket and contented herself with glaring at the child and saying, "Don't let that happen ever again." Cosette went back to what the Thénardiers called her hole, and her large eyes, fixed on the unknown traveler, began to take on an expression they had never known before. It was still only an artless astonishment, but a sort of blind confidence had crept into it. "Oh, you want supper?" the Thénardier asked the traveler. He did not answer. He seemed deep in thought. "Who is this man?" she said between her teeth. "He's just some awful pauper. He hasn't a penny for his supper. Is he ever going to pay me for his lodging? Still, it's very lucky he didn't think to steal the money on the floor." Meanwhile, the door opened, and Éponine and Azalma entered. They were really two pretty little girls, more city girls than peasants, very charming, one with her shiny auburn tresses, the other with her long black braids falling down her back, and both so lively, neat, plump, fresh, and healthy that it was a pleasure to look at them. They were warmly dressed, but with such maternal art that the thickness of the material detracted nothing from the daintiness of it. Winter was taken care of without smothering spring. These two little girls shed light around them. Besides, in the tavern they were royalty. In their clothing, their gaiety, their sounds they made, there was authority. When they came in, the Thénardier said to them in a scolding tone full of adoration, "Ah, there you are, you two." So notice the difference between their appearance and the appearance of Cosette. Then taking them onto her knees, one after the other, smoothed their hair, retying their bows, and finally letting them go with the gentle sort of shake peculiar to mothers, she exclaimed, "Aren't they a mess?" They went and sat down by the fire. They had a doll they turned back and forth on their knees with all sorts of cheerful babbling. From time to time Cosette raised her eyes from their knitting and watched them sadly as they played. Éponine and Azalma did not notice Cosette. To them she was like the dog. The three little girls did not have 24 years among them, and they already represented the whole of human society. On one side envy, on the other scorn. The Thénardier sisters' doll was very faded, very old and broken, but it seemed no less wonderful to Cosette, who had never in her life even had a doll, a real doll, to use an expression all children understand. All at once, the Thénardier, who was constantly going back and forth around the room, noticed that Cosette's attention was wandering, and that instead of working, she was watching the little girls playing. "Ah, I've caught you," she cried. "That's the way you work. I'll make you work with a whip, I will." Without leaving his chair, the stranger turned toward the Thénardier. "Madame," said he, smiling almost diffidently, "why not let her play?" Spoken by any traveler who had eaten a slice of mutton and drunk 2 bottles of wine with his supper, and who did not have the look of an awful pauper, such a wish would have been a command. But for a man who wore such a hat to allow himself a desire, and for a man who wore such a coat to permit himself a wish, was more than the Thénardier thought she could tolerate. She replied sharply, "She has to work since she eats. I don't feed her to have her do nothing." "What is she making?" said the stranger in the gentle voice, which contrasted so strangely with his beggar's clothes and his porter's shoulders. The Thénardiers condescended to answer, "Stockings. Stockings for my little girls, who have none worth speaking of, and would soon have to go barefoot." The man looked at Cosette's poor red feet and went on, "When will she finish that pair of stockings?" "Will take her at least 3 or 4 good days, the lazy thing." "And how much would this pair of stockings cost when it's finished?" The Thénardiers glanced at him scornfully. "At least 30 sous." "Would you take 5 francs for them?" said the man. "Good God!" hooted a wagon driver who was listening. "5 francs! You can bet on it 5 bullets!" Thénardier now thought it was time to speak. "Yes, monsieur, if that's your wish. You can have that pair of stockings for 5 francs. We can't refuse anything to travelers." "You'll have to pay for them now," said the Thénardier in her curt and peremptory way. "I'll buy that pair of stockings," answered the man. "And," he added, taking a 5-franc piece out of his pocket and laying it on the table, "I'll pay for them." Then he turned toward Cosette. "Now, your work belongs to me. Play, my child." The wagon driver was so surprised by that 5-franc piece that he left his glass and went to look at it. "It's really true," he exclaimed, drinking in it. "The real thing, not counterfeit." Thénardier approached and silently put the piece in his pocket. The Thénardier said nothing to say. She bit her lips, and her face took on an expression of hatred. Meanwhile, Cosette was trembling. She ventured to ask, "Madame, is it true? Can I play?" "Play!" said the Thénardier in a fearsome voice. "Thank you, madame," said Cosette, and while her mouth thanked the Thénardier, all her little soul was thanking the traveler. "Thank you, madame." Oh, sorry. Thénardier returned to his drink. His wife whispered in his ear, "Who can that yellow man be?" "I have seen," answered Thénardier in an authoritative tone, "millionaires with coats like that." Cosette had left her knitting, but she had not moved from her spot. Cosette always stirred as little as possible. From a little box behind her she had taken out a few old rags and her little lead sword. Éponine and Azelma paid no attention to what was going on. They had just performed a very important operation. They had caught the kitten. They had thrown the doll on the floor, and Éponine, the elder, was dressing the kitten in spite of her mews and contortions, in clothes and red and blue rags. While she was doing this serious and difficult work, she was talking to her sister in that sweet and charming language of children, whose grace, like the splendor of butterfly wings, escapes when we try to catch it. "Look, look, this doll is more fun than the other one. She moves, she cries, she's warm." Okay, we're gonna skip this. They're just dressing up the cat. Okay, so go down 3 paragraphs. And to the word monsieur. So it's like 3 paragraphs plus a little dialogue. "Monsieur," she said. At this word monsieur, the man turned. The Thénardiers had called him before only yellow or good man. "You see, monsieur," she continued, putting on her most sugary expression, which was even more unbearable than her ferocious manner, "I'm very willing for the child to play. I'm not opposed to it. It's good for once, because you are generous. But you see, she's poor. She has to work." "The child is not yours, then?" asked the man. "Oh dear, no, monsieur. It's a little waif we've taken in out of charity. A sort of imbecile child. She must have water on her brain. Her head is big, as you see. We do all we can for her, but we're not rich. We've written in vain to her part of the country. For 6 months we haven't had any answer. We think her mother must be dead." "Ah," said the man, and fell back to his reverie. The mother was not much, added the Thénardier. She abandoned her child. During the whole conversation, Cosette, as if some instinct had warned her they were talking about her, had not taken her eyes from the Thénardier. She listened. She heard a few words here and there. Meanwhile, the drinkers, all of them 3/4 drunk, were repeating their foul chorus, which increased gaiety. Okay, so we're gonna skim. So Cosette goes and plays with the doll that they let go, and then obviously the Thénardier is very upset. The Thénardier is upset, and the girls are upset that they played with the doll. So the traveler goes out and buys that doll that everybody wanted, that particular doll, and gives it to Cosette, so which of course annoys everybody. Okay, so we're gonna keep going for a few pages. Oh, actually, we're through the end of that chapter. We're just gonna skim throughout the end of that chapter, and we'll start up and page 418. We'll start up with 418, which is chapter 10. If you seek the best, you may find the worst.